It appears that certain ideological currents, particularly those driven by a fervent progressive commitment to anti-racism, feel an overwhelming compulsion to occupy the summit of moral superiority at any price. This drive goes far beyond mere persuasion. It demands total narrative dominance, a form of psychic stewardship over how reality itself is framed and discussed. Legacy media has long been shaped by this impulse, and even as platforms evolve, a powerful residue of influence persists across social media, where algorithms, moderation policies, and cultural pressures converge to protect the sanctified story. Consider the consequences open. Unfiltered debate becomes impossible on matters that threaten the edifice. The systematic grooming gangs in towns across the UK, where organized networks, often drawn from specific immigrant communities, exploited and abused thousands of vulnerable English girls, while authorities looked away, paralyzed by fear of being labeled racist, or the realities of post-apartheid. South Africa, where a web of race-based laws continues to redistribute opportunity along ethnic lines, accompanied by a persistent plague of farm attacks that disproportionately target white landowners, often with brutal violence that receives scant international scrutiny. These are not fringe anomalies. They are documented patterns, yet they remain radioactive in mainstream discourse. The tightening grip became unmistakable after Donald Trump's 2016 victory and the 2017 clashes in Charlottesville. What followed was a coordinated push to wrest greater control over the digital public square, deplatforming, algorithmic demotion, and ever-expanding definitions of hate that conveniently aligned with the prevailing moral framework. The goal was never simply to counter bad ideas. It was to ensure that only one interpretation of history, power, and human suffering could ever hold the stage. At root, this is not mere political strategy. It reflects a deeper psychological pattern. When a collective identity becomes fused with an image of unblemished virtue, any counter-evidence must be exiled to the outer darkness. Uncomfortable facts are not refuted. They are declared morally untouchable. Dissenters are not engaged. They are cast as embodiments of the very evil the virtuous claim to oppose. Offense is weaponized not as genuine emotional response, but as a preemptive strike, a ritual of purification that spares the faithful from the hard labor of self-examination. An objective mind, one that values truth over tribal loyalty, cannot help but notice the fragility. Ideas that collapse the moment they face genuine scrutiny are not ideas at all. They are incantations. When a worldview requires constant protection from reality, when it treats open inquiry as existential threat, it reveals its own incompleteness. Human consciousness naturally seeks wholeness. It grows through tension, through the integration of opposites, through the willingness to stare into the full spectrum of light and shadow within both individuals and societies. A stance that insists on monopolizing the light while banishing every inconvenient shade does not achieve moral clarity. It produces distortion, inflation, and eventually a backlash born of the repressed. The tragedy is that this approach does not protect the vulnerable. It endangers the very principles it claims to uphold. Societies that cannot confront their own complexities, that cannot allow painful truths to surface and be tested, drift toward collective imbalance. They trade genuine understanding for performative purity, and the cost is paid in eroded trust, deepening polarization, and a public square where only the approved narrative survives. For anyone committed to intellectual honesty, the lesson is stark. No ideology owns the moral high ground by decree. That ground must be earned daily in the open arena of evidence and argument. When it is claimed by fiat and defended through censorship and outrage, it ceases to be moral at all. It becomes something else entirely. A psychological fortress built on the very repression it accuses others of practicing.